All right, so if we look at where we picked up last time, remember we had 515,000 euros coming in 60 days. Okay? And we knew that there could be a range of possible outcomes for the spot price. And we could have either used a normal distribution, which is sort of an unbiased expectation about exchange rates in the future, or we could have used a forecast. All right, we actually did both. But in this chapter, we're going to focus more on the forecast. And we're going to compare, using our forecast, what a hedged position would look like relative to an unhedged position. So if we go back down, we can kind of see, depending on the type of hedge, if we used, in this case, a money market hedge, we used a money market hedge, we found out with the money market hedge that we could lock in a value of the receivables at 711, 617. And then we could compare it to our forecast, and our forecast may have some bias in it. It was a purchased forecast, I guess. And we can look at and see where it's beneficial to hedge and under what conditions it would end up being more worthwhile to leave it unhedged. Okay? So we can look at the risk, we can look at the magnitude of the impact. That's what we're looking at here. Okay? And then we're looking at the probabilities associated with those outcomes. Okay? And if we take the sum product of the probability times the magnitude, we get something called the expected benefit or cost of hedging. All right, let me go back. And we had kind of looked at a forward hedge. And when we looked at the forward hedge, okay, we noticed that with the forward hedge, that by using a forward rate, if it was possible to obtain a forward rate, hold on, it's not working. If it was possible to obtain a forward rate, okay, then the forward rate that was quoted was $1.3915. And if we used a forward rate, okay, then our hedged position would be at 716, 623. And you'll kind of notice, I'm going to go ahead and redo this part. Maybe, we'll see if it pulls over here nicely. Didn't want to do that. If we put in the values from the forward hedge right here next to it, it didn't work. If we put in the values of the forward hedge, we can now notice a difference in terms of where it's beneficial and where it's costly. Let's give you some different colors. So now we can kind of see in this case, what we have is if we're using the forward hedge, okay, you can see now that that changes up our outcome because the forward hedge turned out to be more favorable than the money market hedge. And we could lock in a forward amount for the receivables at 716,623. Okay. Now that would change this up. So now we are 60% more likely to utilize the hedge, or the hedge being beneficial, versus a 65%. Exit out. 65%, okay, probability that the hedge becomes useful. Okay. And there's only a 35% chance, okay, that leaving it unhedged is beneficial. Okay. Then we would need to go down and calculate what is the expected cost of hedging by taking the probabilities times the outcome. And all that's going to do is give us a weighted average. And if we look at it, we can kind of see in terms of the weighted average that utilizing that hedge with a forward rate is actually has a negative cost, or meaning that there is an expected benefit to using the forward hedge. Because with the forward hedge, we were able to sell the pounds 60 days forward at $1.3915. That was the forward rate, and the forward rate ended up being much better than what we got using the money market hedge. Okay. And you can actually kind of see it if you go back and look. Once you've established the money market hedge, you can actually calculate the implied forward rate from the money market hedge. Okay. In other words, we can see that if the receivables are worth $711,617 with the money market hedge for our 515,000 euros, that implies that the money market hedge gives us a rate of around $1.3818. Okay. Now, the forward hedge was at $1.3915, so you can see that the forward hedge in this case is a lot better than the money market hedge. And you can also see it down here in terms of the expected benefit, okay? Versus using the money market hedge gave us an expected cost. Okay. So it's nice to compare different alternatives because it doesn't take very long, okay? And we also need something to do, I guess, in this chapter. So if we look at the futures hedge, this is another alternative. Instead of using forward contracts, we could use futures contracts. Sorry about that. We could use futures contracts, and if we use futures contracts, we'll be able to see where that compares relative to the forward hedge. The problem with futures contracts is that it's not a perfect hedge. But it's going to be a pretty good hedge. I'll say it's not perfect, but still very good. The reason is this: with the futures contract, remember the contracts on the euro, the size of the contract was for 125,000 euros. So the problem is if we have 515,000 euros coming in 60 days, we'll actually only be able to hedge 500,000 euros. And this is what would be called under hedging. We're going to hedge as many as we can, but we don't want to hedge more than what we have. Okay. So we're going to under hedge. The reason is if we use 4 contracts, then we're only hedging 4 times 125,000. We're only hedging 500,000 euros. Okay. If we used 5 contracts, we'd be at 625,000 euros. Okay. And we would be overhedged. And most companies, if they're going to have a choice to make, they're going to choose to underhedge versus overhedge. Okay. So anyway, we look at it, and what we can see is a couple things. One, we need to figure out, okay, if we decide to hedge, okay, do we need to take a long position in the futures contracts or a short position in the futures contracts? How do we decide which one we want to do? Well, we go back and remember, what is accounts receivable? So accounts receivable is what's known as a transactional long position in the euro. Okay. Why? Because if the euro strengthens, then our receivables are worth more. But if the euro weakens, then our receivables are worth less. Okay. So what we can see is this is what's known as a transactional long position in the euro. Okay. That's what accounts receivable is. And we're going to need to hedge by taking a financial short position in the euro. Okay. And so our hedge is going to be a short position in the euro on day 0. And how we do that is we sell 4 June futures contracts. Why? Well, today was March 13th. Okay. And our obligation was in 60 days. So our obligation comes due in May, but there may not be a May contract available. And so instead, we're going to use a June contract. If there was a May contract available and expired after May 12th, we would use it. But in fact, since these contracts trade on cycles, we end up using a June contract because it's the only one that's available. That is, we want to use the first available past the due date. Okay. So we don't want our futures contract to expire before the receivables come in. We don't want to have one that's too far out. Okay. So we just pick the first available past the due date. Okay. So what's going to happen is by taking a financial short position in the euro, what we'll do is sell the futures contracts on March 13th, and then we'll wait 60 days. And when our obligation comes in, since we sell the contracts here on March 13th, we'll buy them back on May 12th. Now, what's going to happen? Well, If it turns out that our receivables end up being worth more, we'll have more dollars from the receivables and our hedge will lose money. If the euro weakens, we'll have less dollars from the receivables, but we'll make money on our futures position. And if we add these back in together, where will we be? We'll be right back here in the middle. Because as much as our receivables go up in value, that's how much we'll lose from the futures contracts. And if our receivables go down in value, that's how much money we'll make on our futures trade, our financial position. Okay? So everything's going to end up balancing out. Okay? Will it bounce out perfectly? No. It's not a perfect hedge because this accounts receivable is worth 515,000 euros, and this financial hedge is only worth 500,000 euros. So we're actually going to leave 15,000 euros unhedged. Okay, but that's not very many in the grand scheme of things. Okay, so let's look and see what happens. Okay, so here's our spot rate. Our spot rate, if we go back up top, our spot rate on the euro was $1.3973. And there was a June futures contract available that we could sell for $1.3922. We're going to have to put up some deposit, but we'll get it back. Okay. So there is a slight cost to using the futures hedge as opposed to the forward hedge. But again, it's not much. It's the opportunity cost of a small deposit. What will happen? We have to look at some different scenarios about what will happen. One scenario would be that the spot price decreases. If the spot price decreases, then the June futures contract will decrease. So we can go ahead and look at what happens with our futures trade, and we can look at what happens with our accounts receivables. So let's erase all this. Get us a cleaner slate to work with. All right, so here we go. Let's just look at the accounts receivables first, up top. Okay. On day 0, we have accounts receivable that will be coming in 60 days. That's May 12th. Today is March 13th. Okay. And so this is 60 days later. Okay. If we were at $1.39 and change, and maybe we noticed that the euro went down. Let's suppose it went down to $1.31. Okay. If it goes down to $1.31, then our accounts receivable, which is 515,000 euros, is now worth at $1.31. Our accounts receivables are worth $674,650. Now, luckily, we're also at the same time on day 0 going to sell 4 futures contracts. And what does that mean? That means we've got an agreement with somebody. We can call it Amy. We've got an agreement with Amy to sell 500,000. That's what 4 contracts represent. Sell 500,000 euros to Amy on June 19th. Now, we picked that June contract because there wasn't a May contract available. Turns out it doesn't really matter, because on May 12th, we're going to buy to close out our position. On May 12th, we buy 4 June futures contracts. Why do we buy them? Because we're just using the futures contracts as a hedge. Now, the good news is when we come back to buy the 4 futures contracts in June, the June futures price has changed. Now, since the spot price went down to $1.31, and we assume maybe interest rates are 1% in the US and 1.5% in Europe, the price is going to depend on the spot rate and the difference in interest rates. So in this case, the premium on an annualized basis will be negative 0.5%. If the premium is negative 0.5% on an annualized basis, then the periodic premium, which we have to figure out because we need to know how many days are left between the day that we close out our position. This is when the accounts receivable comes in, and also the date that we're going to close out our futures hedge. So that's the May 12th date. Remember, the June contracts expire on June 19th, so there are 38 days left. So we know that the futures price will be somewhere around $1.31. It will be a little bit less than that because the premium is negative 0.5% on an annualized basis. Since we know there are 38 days left, we can just do it off a 360-day year. 38 divided by 360 times 0.005 negative. The periodic premium is negative 0.00053. So now we can go up. Oops. Right here. So we know then that on May 12th, the June futures price will be equal to $1.31 times 1 plus the periodic premium, which is negative 0.00053. And that when we look back in May, the June futures price should be 1.3, 1.3093. Okay. So what we noticed with this futures hedge is that if the spot price declines, that's when our hedge is going to bring us back up to where we started. Okay. Because notice, if you look at it, our accounts receivables were only worth $674,650. Okay. But let's look what happened from our futures trade. Remember, we agreed to sell 500,000 euros to Amy on June 19th. And that was back when the spot price on the euro was $1.39. So a fair price with Amy, okay, would be to sell these to Amy at $1.3922. And that was a fair price for Amy because that's when that transaction occurred, was when the spot rate was $1.39. Now that the spot price is $1.31, we can close out our position by buying some of the futures, the 4 futures contracts back. So we want to buy 4 June futures contracts. That'll zero out our position because we've got a new agreement with Bob to buy 500,000 euros. We can buy them at $1.3093 in June. Okay. So essentially, we have no futures exposure because we've got an agreement to buy euros from Bob at $1.3093, an agreement to sell euros to Amy at $1.3922. And if we look at the difference between that, so take $1.3922, that's what we sell them to Amy for, minus $1.3093. That's what we're buying them from Bob at. There's 4 contracts. That represents 500,000 euros. And we should get I don't know what happened. $1.3922 minus $1.3093 times 500,000 euros, 41,450. Okay. Why didn't I get 41,450 here? Just a round off error. Okay. Excel doesn't round off. Okay. So I ended up with 41,450. That's the gain. Okay. And so if I add that back to the 674,650, I should get 716,100. Okay. If I don't round off. I mean, if I round off. 76,100. Okay. Now look, that's right back where we expected the value of the euros to be. We expected them to be right around 716,000. So if we go back up top, you can kind of see the expected value of the receivables around 714.5. Using this forecast, using this one, it was 719.6. So somewhere around there. So the futures hedge brings us back to 716,100. Why did the futures hedge work? It's always going to work because if the spot price goes down, we'll make money on the futures trade. If the spot price goes up, we'll lose money on the futures trade, but our accounts receivables will be worth a lot more than we thought. All right, I know that's a lot, so let's see if there's any questions. Any questions on utilizing the futures contracts as a way to hedge? Okay. Remember, all you're doing is figuring out what the transactional position is. Okay. Accounts receivable is a transactional long, so you need to enter into a financial short. How do you do that? Well, with futures contracts, you simply sell futures contracts today and buy them back later. You buy them back at the point at which your accounts receivable comes in. I mean, if you kind of think about it, okay, the futures price is going to be a reflection of the spot price and the premium. Okay. Think about maybe 6 months ago, maybe oil's trading at $50 a barrel. Okay. If oil's trading at $50 a barrel 6 months ago, there might be a futures contract that's going to be reflective of the price of oil and the cost to hold it. Okay, it's what's called a carrying cost. Okay. So the futures price might be something like $55 if oil's trading at $50 a barrel, because there is some cost to holding on to it for a period of time. Now, what happens today? Well, if the spot price of oil has dropped to $25 a barrel, okay, then the futures price might be something like $28 or $29 a barrel. So what you can see is there's that same cost to hold on to the oil for a period of time. That's what's called a carrying cost. And so what happens is, as the spot price for something comes down, so will the futures price. And if the spot price were to go up, so would the futures price go up. Okay. So if oil had jumped up to $80 a barrel, then the futures price might be like $84 or $85. Currency works the same way. Futures contracts on currency are essentially the spot price plus the carrying costs until the contract matures. Now, the difference with currency is the carrying cost can be positive or negative. In this case, the carrying cost was negative if interest rates are higher on the euro than they are on the dollar. So that's only the only kind of weird thing with currency, is that the carrying cost can be either positive or negative. But if you think about it, the futures price is simply equal to the spot price plus the cost of carry. Okay? I'll give you another example, kind of see it. Okay? There might be a time when there's some inefficiencies in the market. And so there was a point, this was a couple of years ago, okay, and the futures price was much higher than what the fundamentals would suggest. Okay. So let's suppose it costs $3 to carry oil, okay, the traditional carrying cost for oil, okay, a barrel. And this is back when maybe oil was $80 a gallon, and the futures price somehow jumped up to like 90. Okay? And it should have been somewhere around 83. And so someone, I can't remember if it was Goldman Sachs or some investment brokerage house, was looking at it and they said, this doesn't make sense. And so the one guy's boss said, well, if it doesn't make sense, how are you going to capitalize on it? I know it doesn't make sense, but that's what the futures price is selling for. So what he ended up doing was figuring out, okay, the traditional carrying cost is about $3 a barrel for oil. And so he said, well, what does that actually entail? And what it entails, what he did was rented a tanker, one of those super tanker ships, okay, found one at a port, filled it up with oil at the spot price, drove it offshore for 3 months, okay, insured it, okay, then drove it back into port and sold it for $90 a barrel. Okay. So the spot price was 80. So he filled up a gigantic tanker ship with oil, okay, bought it at $80 a barrel, hired a captain to sit 2 miles offshore in international waters and sit there for 2 months and then bring the oil back in. And since he had locked in a price to sell it for 90, ended up making $6 a barrel if his carrying cost was around 3. So you can see that there may be some inefficiencies, but just like with covered interest arbitrage, it's a lot easier to use covered interest arbitrage with currency than it is with commodities. So sometimes you'll see a commodity be outside of the parameters that you normally expect, but not very often. In this case, once it got too far outside the parameters, that's when someone recognized an inefficiency and ended up bringing it back down into the more traditional relationship between forward and spot prices. Okay, so if you think about that kind of example, if there is sort of like about a $3 a barrel carrying cost for oil, then as oil prices go up, the futures price will go up. And if oil prices go down, the futures price will go down. Okay. Now it's a function of what it costs to carry it for a time period. Okay. But with currency, it sort of follows the same thing, except you have to remember the carrying cost can be slightly positive or slightly negative, okay, depending on the difference in interest rates. All right. Let's go ahead and look at using options, unless there were questions on futures contracts. All right, let's look at the option hedge, and then we'll do some problems so that you can kind of see what your quiz may be like. All right, I'm going to go ahead and erase some of this. Maybe it won't let me erase it. There it goes. All right. So if we look at an option hedge, first of all, we've got to figure out what kind of options should we use if we want to hedge accounts receivable. Okay. Well, you should have remembered from your last test, if you want to hedge accounts receivable, you use a put option to hedge accounts receivables. Why? Because we want the right, but not obligation, to sell. And in fact, that's what a put option is giving us. The right, but not obligation, to sell euros. Okay. Now, part of it is we got to pick an exercise price, or what's called a strike price. The exercise price or strike price is the specified price that you can sell it at. Okay. So let's suppose we picked an exercise price of $1.38. Okay. Then just like other insurance contracts, it's going to have a premium involved. And you're going to have to pay the premium up front. Okay. Now, one thing about option contracts is they generally trade in increments of 10,000. Okay. So if you remember from the investment, we haven't had it, but if some of you had an investments class and you look at options on stock, it trades in increments of 100. One contract is for 100 shares. Well, for currency, the traditional contract size is 10,000. So if we want to hedge 515,000 euros, again, not perfect, but good. We're going to buy 51 contracts. And that's going to give us the right to sell 510,000 euros. Even though we want to sell 515, we're going to under hedge. But we're not under hedging by very much. Yeah. We're hedging most of the transaction. All right. So by buying 51 contracts, if the price is 3 cents per unit, and the price is always given per unit, if it's 3 cents a unit times 10,000 euros per contract times 51 contracts, then the premium we're going to have to pay up front is $15,300. Okay. So the cost was 3 cents. So we're going to pay $15,300 up front, and that's going to give us a piece of paper that gives us the right to sell 510,000 euros. The key is it's a right, but not an obligation. So we're not obligated to do so. Okay. But you pay the premium, just like with car insurance, whether you use it or not. Okay. So what we have to look at is we'll again use our forecast for potential spot rates in the future and the probabilities associated with each one. Okay. So remember, we can set up a chart. What are our receivables worth? Okay. With no hedge in place, then they will vary directly with the spot price. Okay. Or we can look at our hedged position. Okay. If we decide to hedge, okay, then we're going to pay the 15,300 up front. Now we're going to decide whether or not to use our put option. This is what's called exercising the put. Okay. Do you want to use your put option and sell 510,000 euros at $1.38 if the euro is trading at $1.30? And the answer is yes. Yes, we do. Okay. We would rather attach the put option to those euros and sell them at $1.38 than go into the open market and sell them for $1.30. if in fact that's what the spot rate turns out to be. Okay. All right, how do we get this number right here? Okay. If we sell 510,000 euros with our put option, and we collect $1.38 for those euros, plus we have 5,000 left over because it was an odd number in terms of contracts. And those 5,000 we have to sell at the going spot price. So we're hedging most of it, but not all of it. But we're hedging the majority of it, the most we can. So 510,000 euros at $1.38 is 703,800. We had 5,000 left over, which we sold for $1.30. That's 6,500. If we add the two together, we get 710,300. Okay. So we can see what happens at $1.30. Now let's go to the other extreme. What happens at $1.45? Well, remember, the put option was the right but not obligation. Okay. So at $1.45 per euro, this was at $1.30. At $1.45 per euro, okay, we're not going to exercise. We don't have to. We choose not to because it's better to sell them at $1.45 than to sell them at $1.38. Okay. So at $1.45, we end up selling 515,000 euros at $1.45. It's kind of like buying car insurance and not having a wreck. Okay? Nothing happens. Okay? Except in this case, it's all right because if the euro strengthens, then our receivables are worth 746, 750. Okay? And we end up collecting more than what we expected. Okay? But remember, if we hedge, this isn't the amount we receive on a net basis, because remember up front, we had to do what? Pay a premium. Okay. So we're going to have to subtract out the 15,300. So if we decide to hedge with a put option and something good happens and the euro goes up, okay, then we still receive more than we expected, but we won't receive as much as if we didn't hedge. Okay. And the difference or the cost of using the option is the premium paid. Okay. So the difference between these two is just the premium paid. Okay. So what happens is the put option basically sets a floor for the minimum amount they can be worth, but it allows us to take advantage of it going up. Okay. So the put option has some unique characteristics to it. Okay. It's not a complete hedge, it's like a partial hedge. Okay. It's basically hedging against the downside risk while allowing the upside to occur. Now, the problem with this is that it's kind of expensive, or it can be expensive. Yeah. And you pay the premium no matter what happens. All right, see if there's any questions on the option hedge. Questions on any of the numbers on the option hedge? All right, let's go ahead then and look at some of the problems from the book. I'm going to give you a second just to open up your book to the back of chapter 11. We're on page 376. We can look at number 2 and number 3. This is looking at money market hedges on receivables and payables. All right, I'm just going to share the screen. Oops. I lost my writing ability. Okay. All right, let's look at number 2. And it says, assume that Stephen Point has net receivables of 100,000 Singapore dollars due in 90 days. And the spot rate is 50 cents. And the Singapore interest rate is 2% over 90 days. Okay. So that's a periodic rate. Okay. They didn't give us an interest rate on the US dollar, but we'll need one. So I'm going to add one in there. Okay. So we've got 90 days. We've got receivables coming in of 100,000 Singapore dollars. Okay. So remember what we want to do with the money market hedge. What we want to do with the money market hedge is we really want to borrow against the receivables. How are we going to do that? In reality, we'll do it by issuing 100,000 Singapore dollar money market security. Okay. But in reality, or in sort of easier terms, if the 90-day interest rate, so this is the periodic interest rate, is 2%, it would mean the nominal interest rate would be 8% on the Singapore dollar. Okay. I'll be more specific on things, but they gave us a periodic interest rate here. Okay. So essentially, if the interest rate on the Singapore dollar is 2%, then if you sold $100,000 face value money market security, that had a face value of 100,000, you would receive today $98,039 Singapore dollars. Okay. Now, what will happen is when the accounts receivable will come in, you will use that money to pay back your loan. Okay. So what you've done is essentially converted money that you expect to come in 90 days into cash today. And you've done it by sort of selling those receivables at a discount. So you've issued a money market security that told someone you'd pay them 100,000 Singapore dollars in 90 days. Yeah. They paid you $98,039 Singapore dollars today. Yeah. The good news is that the spot rate today is known on the Singapore dollar, just like every spot rate is known. And it's 50 cents for 1 Singapore dollar. Okay. So we can convert these into US dollars. And in US dollars, they'd be worth $49,020 today. Now, what you really need to do is figure out what interest rates are in the US. And I'll go ahead and use some easy number. Let's suppose the nominal rate is 4%. So the 90-day periodic rate would be 1%. So really, for an apples to apples comparison, we'd have to take that money and move it ahead to day 90. So we could compare it to either an unhedged position or some other type of hedged position. But we want to compare day 90 to day 90. So if interest rates in the US were 4% on a nominal basis or 1% per 90 days, then a money market hedge would give us accounts receivable that were worth $49,510 in 90 days. And if you wanted to, you could also come up with an implied forward rate. After all, you're converting 100,000 Singapore dollars into 49,510 US dollars. So the implied forward rate would be 0.4951. 0.4951 US dollars to 1 Singapore dollar. All right, let's go ahead and look at number 3. This is accounts payable. We've got to make a payment of 200,000 Mexican pesos in 180 days. And if we want to use a money market hedge, it's going to be similar, but different than what we did with receivables. Okay. So an easy way to think about it is you pay the receivables, quote unquote, early. Okay. But you're not really paying them early. You're buying enough pesos today to have 200,000 in 180 days. Okay. So remember, you can earn interest on the peso. I told you that the periodic rate on the peso was 7% for 180 days. So that'd be equivalent to a 14% nominal rate. All right. They didn't give us a US dollar interest rate. So let's leave the US dollar interest rate at 4% in nominal terms. So the periodic rate would be 2% for 180 days. Okay. This was not given, but we need it. Okay. And you'll see why. Okay. So how do we pay the receivables early? We buy enough pesos today so that if we could purchase a money market security that had a $200,000 face value, okay, how many pesos would we need today to purchase that? Okay. So the idea is that if you buy pesos today but don't make the payment for 180 days, you can still earn 7% on that money. So the question is, how many do we need to buy today? We need to buy enough that they earn 7% so that we'll have 200,000 in 180 days. Okay. And what X turns out to be is 200,000 divided by 1.07. It turns out to be 186,916 pesos today. So we need to go ahead and buy those pesos today, then we can put them in the bank. Earn 7% for 180 days. And at the end, on day 180, they'll be worth 200,000. And we can use those to make our payment. Uh-oh. Okay, I didn't lose it. All right. Now the question is, how is this a money market hedge? Okay. It's a hedge because by buying them early, okay, we're actually going to borrow US dollars to buy the 186,916 pesos that we need. Okay. All right, because we know what the spot rate is, we'll know how many US dollars we need to borrow. The spot rate today is 10 cents. So we're going to need to borrow $18,691.60. And if we have to borrow that money and the interest rate on the dollar is 2%, then paying back the US dollar loan in 180 days is the same as paying for the receivables. So by paying back the US dollar loan, we're essentially making the same thing as a 200,000 Mexican peso accounts payable. It's just we're paying dollars. Okay. Why? Because essentially we paid the accounts payable early. We didn't really pay it early, but we set aside enough pesos that if they earn 7% interest, they would grow to 200,000. So buying that 200,000 face value peso security, once that security matures, we'll use it to make our accounts payable. It's going to cost us 186,916 pesos today. But if we don't use our own money and decide to borrow it, then we can borrow $18,691.60 today. If we get charged 2% interest, we're basically paying it back at 190. Not 190. Paying it back at 19,065. 18,691.6 times 1.02. 19,065.40. So when we pay back the US dollar loan, we're basically paying back $19,065. It's equivalent to what 200,000 pesos would cost. Because we essentially did this in sort of opposite order. Okay. We borrowed US dollars so we could buy the number of pesos we needed to make the accounts payable. Okay. So we had to work backwards. We had to figure out how many pesos we needed today to pay it early. Okay. Then we borrowed the number of dollars to buy those pesos. And so when we repay the dollar loan, it's equivalent to paying off the accounts payable. Okay. So repaying the dollar loan in 180 days means essentially those payables cost us 19,065 on day 180. And we can compare that to unhedged positions. All right, there's a few more examples. Okay. But I think you'll be able to figure out the quiz pretty easily. Okay. If you don't, okay, we can, if there's a whole bunch of trouble. Okay, I was hoping to go over a few more problems, but I think we've gone over enough. But we'll find out, I guess. All right, so remember quiz. Well, hold on a second. All right. I was hoping to go over a few more problems. Let me just go ahead and I'm going to push the quiz back. Okay. So it hasn't opened up yet. We still have 2 minutes. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and push the quiz back, and we're going to have the quiz next Monday. And that way we can go over some more problems with chapter 11. And that'll give you a chance to work through some of the questions, read through the chapter. And then we'll just go over some more problems on Monday, and then we can have the quiz. All right. All right. Well, let me lock that out. I'm going to end the meeting now so I can lock out that quiz. And we'll have it next Monday instead.